Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Lindsay Lerner, and you're listening to The Cost of the Status Quo. More people than ever are questioning why they do what they do and forging their own path. And on this show, I sit down with these entrepreneurs, trailblazers, creatives, and overall awesome beings to discuss the ideas, the opportunities, and the overall tips and tricks they're using so that the rest of us can do the same. This is The Cost of the Status Quo. Hey, welcome to The Cost of the Status Quo, the podcast where we explore new ways of thinking, and today we're talking about aging, health, and wellness. Today we're thrilled to have Brit Fleck, an interdisciplinary gerontologist, designer, and healer as our guest. Britt has worked with a range of clients from small startups to large nonprofits, including AARP Innovation Labs and NBC Health. She's known for her dedication to illuminating important issues in the spaces of aging, caregiving, wellness, and death. Britt holds a bachelor's degree in human development and aging from the University of Southern California's Davis School of Gerontology and is a yoga therapist for seniors and a certified end-of-life doula. Currently based in Oakland, California, she is supporting individuals in hospice, teaching yoga to seniors, and exploring her creativity. In this episode, Britt shares her insights on the intersection of aging, health, and of course, wellness, and how we can create a more compassionate society for all. So join us for this fascinating conversation with Brit Fleck. Thanks, Britt, so much for being here today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We'll jump in all the way to the beginning like we always do. Where in the world did you grow up? And how do you think that your upbringing really impacted now, in hindsight, the trajectory of your life?
Oh, just starting real, light in there.
That's what we do.
From the beginning. I love it. I guess officially was born in Silver Spring, Maryland, which is about 20 minutes outside of Washington, D.C. But I grew up in Bethesda, Maryland. And I'm the oldest of three girls. So my, birth order as an only child has really shifted or kind of like molded my identity as a person in the world. And I am very grateful to say that I had a very quintessential, privileged, safe, loving childhood in this suburban town outside of DC. My parents are both available emotionally and physically. And I feel like I had a very lucky upbringing in a lot of ways.
Definitely. Yeah, that's definitely, that's not always how it goes.
It's definitely not always how it goes. And of course it wasn't perfect. There were, like every family, everyone has their stuff, but I'm really grateful for where I have come from and the values that my family has instilled in me.
For sure. Was there what was the reason of being outside of DC? Did your parents work there?
Yeah, my mom, my parents met in college. So like growing up, I thought like, that's what you do. You meet your partner in college. They met when they were 19 years old. And my mom was working at NBC in New York City after they graduated college. And such a cool job. She would like at lunch get to go watch SNL perform and amazing things like that. And they moved her to DC. She had been working with NBC for 35 years. And as of December, she just left.
Oof. Congrats.
Yeah. It's a good, beautiful opening of her next step. But yeah, my dad followed her there. They, started a life together and moved to the burbs.
Very cool.
And had three girls. And
there you go.
Did the thing. My dad's
That's
always
awesome.
been an entrepreneur. A million different things.
Cool. Oh, that's rad.
Yeah.
Did that, is that where your entrepreneurial itch has come from?
Totally. And I feel like in so many ways, like my mom was our like stable force in the house, which obviously traditionally the man holds the weight in that way. And so I feel like also just underlining my childhood, so much of my values came from that, and knowing that equality was it. And
totally. Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah. And that like you can do anything you want in the world. And obviously that's an immense privilege, but they always instilled that into us.
That's very cool. Yeah, I had a similar situation. My mom always had like her stable job, like everything, stability over everything. That is always and has always been her priority, which I respect the consistency. I could never be in an office all day. So all power to her in that regard.
Well, that was the norm, right? Like that was the expectation. That was the way that things were kind of like mapped out for you. And diverging from that was wrong or other or different.
Yeah, exactly. And so, yeah, she's working that gig, and it's always been consistent in that way. And then my dad had his own construction company. So he was always the one, waking up like super early in the morning, doing like runs to Lowe's and getting all the gear and whatnot, and then building things and moving and grooving. So that's similar for sure.
Yeah. Bopping around. That's what my dad likes to call it. He actually, like for the greater half of my childhood, he was a candyman, and he worked in the gumball industry amongst having like 10 different kinds of businesses. But yeah, he would always bring home gum and different candy and new inventions that he was trying. And actually, for you and anyone listening, he has a all natural bubble gum. It's called Tree Hugger bubble gum. It's in Whole Foods and all these organic markets. It's amazing. And he likes to say he was like the start of the wave of like natural gum, which was a wave.
Yeah, I mean, that's huge. All of like the chemicals that are in gum, that's a big reason why I've never I let that habit go. And so that's really good to know. I have to check it out.
Tree Hugger gum.
That's rad. Heck yeah. Oh, cool. And so after, you did high school and outside of DC as well?
Yep. Mm-hmm. Walt Whitman High School, which actually, ironically, like throughout high school, since Walt Whitman was a queer poet before, the wave of, I guess, like modern consciousness now, which obviously still has so much catching up to do, but we would have protesters outside of our school, like anti, gay rights people being like, which outside of Washington, D.C., a very metropolitan liberal area, but it's, a few weeks ago, there was someone vandalized the front of my school with a swastika, and it's a primarily Jewish area, which is like, what? Like, yeah.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I was raised conservative Jewish, and there were several instances where swastikas were put up on our synagogue. And that was always something that it was just like, I don't quite understand why. Like, all right. So yeah, definitely interesting. And what prompted the decision to head out to California?
Well, also just to the Jewish piece, I'm a Jewish person as well. And that's a really big, like, part of my identity, and I guess a big part of my childhood.
That's why we're getting along.
Totally. Jews gotta look out for each other. But yeah, I moved to California when I was 18 for the dream. but actually I had this vision of myself as a kid, like living in California, and again, such a privilege, but like most people in my area were going to the rah-rah Big Ten schools, like really excited about football. And I was really excited about a really small gerontology program at USC.
How did you even know what gerontology was?
I give credit to my mom. I just, as a kid, always was expressing interest in reproduction and birth. And now, after really like reflecting and understanding the trajectory of my life, it was me just trying to understand kind of like where we come from, where we're going, and who and what I could trust to tell me how. And so I always showed that interest. And I guess somehow she was working in health media at the time and did a lot of like health campaigning, and so knew about the field of gerontology. But most people traditionally think it's like, when you think of gerontology, you think of a geriatric doctor, where it's such a more expansive field than just traditional medicine. So that was kind of the start of it. Yeah, so gerontology is the study of lifespan health from, they call it cradle to casket, which now the casket is kind of an outdated idea in a lot of ways, because most people are not actually getting buried, and I can say more about that. But yeah, just looking at health from a biopsychosocial, emotional, spiritual perspective, which we all have and all go through from the day that we are born.
Totally. Oh, that's so cool. And so you end up 18, baby Britt, out. Yeah. Were you by yourself?
Yeah, and I actually was Brittany. I was like, that was my identity. I feel like Brittany and Britt are two different people. But yeah, I get there freshman year, and my first day of class, and I had a cool living situation freshman year. I was in a random dorm with 8 roommates, people from all over the country, and to this day, they're some of my best friends. I'm actually going to one of their weddings in a few weeks. And yeah, just it could have been obviously so different than that, but we really,
Yeah, of course.
yeah, we love
And
each
to your
other.
point about being like really identified with Brittany, what was that transition
Yeah,
for you?
that didn't happen until after college.
Okay.
In a lot of ways, Britt is like the more sophisticated, grounded, adult, clear grounded version of myself, and Brittany is very much still finding her way.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, and names in general hold so much power and so much force. And I think that I had a friend recently who completely changed his name. And it was very interesting to hear from his perspective the power and the gravity that held for him and how important it was to like signify this new chapter of his life and where he's at and how he's moving forward. And I was thinking about that too. I was like, oh man, this is like, maybe there's something to it.
It was scary. I mean, it was definitely scary at first because I was like, who am I to claim a new identity? And then I was like, who am I not to?
Right.
You know?
Oh, totally. Yeah, I play around with that a little bit because my middle name is Alexis and my partner calls me Lexi.
That's my sister's name.
Which I love it. She's the only person who calls me that.
Interesting.
And so it's interesting. I feel like it brings up different feelings when I hear that versus Lindsay. And so when my buddy had changed his name, I was like, huh.
Cool.
Maybe this is a path.
It absolutely is. And if you want to be Lexi, you should absolutely be Lexi whenever you want. And it's crazy that we're talking about this right now because last night I found myself on a rabbit hole, as one does, learning about plural activism. Do you know anything about this?
Tell me more.
Plural activism, or multiples, is the politically correct term for dissociative identity disorder. So people that have the way that they speak about it is many people in one body. And, one could say that, they're mentally ill or that, they're not living in this reality. But people who identify in this way, that is not the case. It is that there are many, there's a Lindsay, there's a Lexi, there's a Britt, there's all these different people of different ages that are all in your psyche. And yeah, there's a huge emerging movement of people that are reclaiming and helping educate. And I'm part of this listserv called SF Chalkboard. And someone wrote last night, "Hi, we're the Redwoods, looking to meet other people who care about plural activism and multiples and all the things." And then I was just like, and I woke up and I was journaling about like, what does that actually mean from like a spiritual perspective? Like, are there many souls in one body? Or because it was crazy watching this video because I went on this YouTube hole and the woman who shows up is like a very grounded middle, I don't know, probably 20s or 30s woman, able to talk about this, which is for a lot of people a response to childhood trauma. And halfway through the interview, she's like, "Oh, someone else is here." And then all of a sudden she switches and she takes on this persona of this 13-year-old girl. And, the girl is not an adult. She's acting from the place of a child. And it was just crazy. I'd never learned about that before. And when you think about different selves, I think about different parts of myself, but not as different people.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I mean, in general, I think we all have elements of that inside of us. And I think that's what's so depressing about the current society that we're existing in, is it's just like this continuous force of like, no, you must act this way in this situation in order to be accepted. But the reality is like, there's so many different ways of existing and navigating and being in the world that shutting those down it's harsh.
Especially if the selves, like the ones that are trying to be out the most, you're within a system like work that, it's not accepted, supported.
for you, you graduate, we're in the Brit phase. What happens post graduation?
Yeah, well, actually, before graduation, I guess like a big important turning point in my trajectory was actually my first day of freshman year. I got a call that my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer. And we, in a lot of ways, knew that it was a risk because my grandma also has breast cancer. And I, for some reason, knew that that's what, when she called to tell me that she needed to talk to me about something, that was what it was. And actually, at the same time, my uncle, her oldest brother, who was someone that was so important to me, was in the process of dying of bladder cancer. And bladder cancer is, it has a 96% survival rate. Nobody dies of bladder cancer. It's very, very treatable. But his name's Kenny. He is very resistant to Western medicine. So it was during that period of time, her going through treatment and thankfully into remission while he was dying was a really intense but definitive period for me of like, how do I look at health? How do I look at who can I trust to tell me how and why? And what does it mean to live and age well while I was like, studying this? Yeah, that was a really big turning point for me in my life, because it also made me look at death in a way that was about choice in a lot of ways. Because what do you do in a situation when someone you love, do you just sit back and let them die before your eyes, or force them to seek treatment that doesn't align with their values? So yeah, I kind of always had this like curiosity about death and sickness, but I didn't actually start to get more into that until many years after college, because after college, I was worried about paying student loan debt back, and I,
as one does,
wanted that stability of a successful post-grad. And I had
an illusion, huh?
An illusion. And that's what I thought success was. Like this, I remember my first day going to an office, I was like, is this really what everyone does? Like, is this what it is? Like sitting in a cubicle, I remember at AARP, that was my first job out of school. And I have so much love for that place. It shaped and grew me in so many ways. But I do have I have this memory of being in a cubicle there, wearing my, business casual, uncomfortable skirt and jacket, and just being like, what? This is it? Like, everyone's fake. Everyone's pretending. Everyone's pretending that this is normal.
I'm so glad you're here.
I'm so happy to be talking about this. Because in a lot of ways, like in the trajectory of my life, and I know that you probably resonate, like, I just don't know. I don't know how people do it. It's, I just genuinely don't get it.
Same. It all ties back to this, tying of self-worth to that success, whatever that is. And like that definite tying of success to financial success and what that looks like and what that is. And I had a conversation with my friend the other day about this, and she was like, why? She texted me, Linz, I'm having a hard time with this job. I've been at it for about a year. I'm totally miserable. Pays great. It just sucks. And I'm having a really hard time because when I reflect back on it and journal and write and talk about it and think about it, the time that I was the happiest was when I had the least amount of money and the least support and the least stability. And she was traveling and doing all these things. And I was like, yeah, man, and I can't comprehend why, out of all of the things that we could be creating, that we could be doing in society at large, that this is the path that we've collectively chosen to go down.
In a lot of ways, this like breaking of the illusion, I think, would not have happened if it wasn't for COVID. And it's the same thing with conscious death awareness in the same way, because it's the first time as a society that we've needed to sit and contemplate our collective mortality and what that means, along with how we show up in the world as it relates to work. And obviously, like physically, we were sequestered into our homes. But yeah, in a lot of ways, like I I would never, wish COVID upon the people who've lost their loved ones, but for what it has done to the modern workforce and the recontemplation of success, it's definitely started to get the balls moving with people who I don't think were thinking of these things before.
Oh, totally. And so walk me through what happened when you were at AARP. What did that look like? You're designing products, services, obviously for older adults. What was that like? What were those main takeaways?
Yeah, I mean, just like anything, there's a lot of truths at play at once. So I'd say, like, to the question of like what the actual job, the day to day was, yeah, that stuff was fun. Like, we were bringing in seniors from 60 to 90 to come in and essentially talk about their pain. And the division that I was working in was around personal development, personal fulfillment, and social connection. And we kind of had a blank slate in a lot of ways, because where I was working, the Innovation Lab, our job primarily was to generate new revenue for AARP. And for those of you who don't know what it is, it's the largest membership organization supporting older adults. They have 38 million members, so just a few. And most people think of AARP as the old people organization, whereas it is so much more than that. And so part of my role was creating products and services to support, they say, to choose how you live as you age. And that word choose is really important. And so, yeah, we had the privilege of getting to help do that. My favorite projects that I did were about sex and relationship building and dating and memory preservation. So, yeah, we just have people come in and talk to us about those things, which in a lot of ways was exhausting, but also so beautiful. And we take those insights and bucket them into different themes depending on what the specific project was, and start building businesses and testing it in the market. And it was really fun. And I had a lot of autonomy for someone that was newly out of school. And it was my first exposure to being a part of a system that was really stifling for me. And also the start of my many experiences of having a straight white male boss who just did not understand my experience in the world. And unfortunately, to this day, I've had many of those experiences, some more traumatic than others. And this one specifically was a really important part of my growth, but very challenging.
Totally. Especially, I mean, being right out of college, that's intense. And it's, especially as women, I don't know. I don't want to speak to your experience, but for me, advocating of oneself is ridiculously challenging, far more than it should be, but especially right out of college.
Yeah. And when you're looking for that kind of like mentorship and support and guidance, and are still trying to navigate how you show up as a professional person, but also are respected, it was a really hard time.
I think that's the other interesting thing too, to your point about leadership. And I mean, another thing that obviously transpired during COVID, and the light was shown on that during COVID in terms of the faces of leadership and what does that look like and how does that present. And to your point about having, these like middle-aged cis white male leaders who don't understand the perspective, who don't understand the position that younger women are in particular. That's always what blows my mind. Even in hindsight, looking back, for me, I was fortunate enough to have so many great middle-aged white male mentors. And then, I felt like I was going nuts because I truly never, none of their advice was working. And I would spend hours, breakfast, lunch, dinner meetings, all these things, building my first business. And they were giving me, these sound bites and these books and these recommendations that all sounded so fantastic. And then when I attempted to put them into practice, it was like, why isn't this working? It was like, now I can, obviously you can always connect the dots backwards. Seeing in hindsight, you're like, that's not quite what happened.
That's why.
You said something earlier that stuck out to me about your time at AARP and interfacing with these different members in terms of it being sometimes exhausting. How, one, is that an issue now? Two, how did you navigate that at the time? Being able to figure out like what those boundaries are and how to be able to navigate, receiving someone's questions, comments, concerns, and being there for them and holding that space, but also not completely depleting yourself.
Such a good question, especially because that period of my life was so about understanding boundaries and understanding how to have them. And to the question of, or the conversation before about childhood, I grew up in a house with no boundaries, which in so many ways has shaped my ability to love deeply. And I, again, would never change that. And I didn't learn in a traditional way that I could have, that my no was enough, done. That's an end of a sentence. We didn't lock our doors in our house. And no one was allowed to close their doors in the loving way, in like so much. We just love each other. We want to be together all the time. The psychological term is enmeshment, which I think, again, there's a double-edged sword to both things. It's hard for me to talk about anything negative about my childhood in a lot of ways because I feel that shame and guilt. But part of my work is also like, I can have a beautiful experience and then it also can have had effects on me. And so thankfully I have parents that are open and willing to learn and grow and talk about these things. So, but yeah, I mean, that period of life, I took everything on. And I think that's also a lot of the reasons why I chose this field is because I'm a bleeding empath and didn't know that there was another choice to not feel that way all the time. And so,
if you
yeah,
want
like
to teach me that,
years at AARP would
feel free.
I'm starting actually for the first time in my life to really understand how, which, 7 years ago, Britt would be like, wait, what? Who are you? Like, how? Like, I was just debilitated all the time by my empathy, by my feelings, and yeah, I'd come home exhausted. I'd cry for hours about things that were completely separate from myself. And I didn't understand why I was feeling so drained because I didn't have that language. I didn't have that life experience. And so I put all my energy into yoga and my meditation practice, which was a very healthy outlet. And in a lot of ways, like I didn't know how to cope.
And so you've taken, that yoga practice and now have since then become a yoga teacher. You're also getting into, presumably, and correct me if I'm wrong, that also led to a lot of the end of life care doula work that you're doing. When you're supporting these individuals in hospice, when you're teaching yoga to seniors, how did these experiences inform your approach to public health and end of life care in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot about how we are just walking projections of each other in the world all the time. And so much of my ability to be able to show up for another person in arguably the most challenging moment in life is being clear, not is being able to be a mirror and not finding myself absorbing. Like yesterday, here's an example. I teach a yoga class at the memory care unit in Sunrise Senior Living in the Oakland Hills. And I have this sweet woman who comes to my class. Her name's Sylvie. And it's interesting when we think about childhood and how that parlays into aging, because a lot of people, especially with different kinds of cognitive decline, relive their childhood trauma and are stuck in this loop of certain experiences that they've had in the past. And there's this one woman, Sylvie, who her loop is around feeling like not that it's not true, but like her thing is like her son dropped her off. She can't ever leave. Where's my home? Why is like just confusion, utter confusion of like the lack of autonomy over her life. And I think a previous version of me would have taken on that in a different way. Whereas now I'm able to have this awareness of like, this is her experience and that I can be a patient loving witness to, and it's not my job to fix it.
Yes, I'm so happy that you are there. And my brain was like, we got to get a car.
Practice.
We got to pick Sylvie up. We got to take her out. it's
Oh,
always
yeah.
that like constant need to do, always.
Well, when you said like you have so many podcasts today, like that to me, I don't know how. That sounds so hard. Just to be in these constant, like, it's a beautiful thing to get to do empathetic work in the world, but also at what cost of yourself?
We've spoken a lot in terms of folks involved with the cost of the status quo, whether they're coming to events, they're listening to the podcast, folks who have been on the podcast, about this idea of being a multi-hyphenate human being and the ability to be amazingly good and successful at more than one thing. So for you, as this interdisciplinary gerontologist and a designer and a healer and a yoga teacher, we can keep the hyphens going all day. How, and I don't think this is the right word, but how do you balance, quote unquote, whatever that illusion is, how do you balance these different roles and the disciplines in your work? And I know from my experience, it's always the context in which I meet people that they decide, to your point about that mirroring, they decide, oh, this is what you are. This is what you do. That's it. And end of sentence. And it's so hilarious to me when I meet someone in one lane and then they experience me in another and they're like, what the hell? Like, you're not, what? And it trips up something in them. I'm like, I don't have a problem. I love doing all of these things. Do you have a problem with that?
That's it. It's about your own relationship to it. Because again, we're just walking projections. Like that person who was like, oh, I haven't seen you in this way. They're not comfortable in seeing themselves in another way than they already are. And so for me, it's about like just remembering like, I am so much more than all these things. And like righteousness of like being able to claim a title in a lot of ways, because I think we're all just so obsessed with belonging. And I mean, I feel like I am. We, in different ways, fear being alone. And that can come from not belonging to a group, belonging to an identity, to a someone, to a whatever it is. And that's scary. It's scary. But then when you like separate that, like that, I guess it's like the rational from the feeling. It's like, okay, rationally, like it's all love, like it doesn't matter. And that's actually for me a really important spiritual practice of mine, is reminding myself that I'm going to die. I have an alarm on my phone that goes off every day that says you are going to die, because it's so easy to get caught up in the status quo of what the shoulds are. And then when I remember that this life is finite and this is just a vessel, I'm like, oh, all the bullshit. It's so much easier to get rid of some of the bullshit, because I'm like, oh, right. But we forget it.
And I think it's interesting, obviously, given your work, you spend so much more time thinking about death than the average person. So what does a typical day for you look like? Obviously, there is no typical day, but in the course of a week, you're teaching these yoga classes, you're soon to be a student again, which we'll touch on later, but you're teaching yoga classes, you're then, holding space for people who are dying. And, in between you have your own creative projects, you're traveling. Like, how does all of that come together? And ultimately, what is it like in the role of a death doula?
Just to start off with, like when I think about death, it's everyone's experience of dying is so individual to themselves that it's in a lot of ways easy to, I don't want to use the word code switch because it's absolutely not that, but like it's a very different sort of presence for each experience, because my death is going to look very different from your death. And there is no one death or one dying process or one aging process or one healing journey that looks the same. So knowing that that's the case is really humbling, because in a lot of ways, like, there is no consistency in this work and in life. It's a greater practice of releasing control to life. And yeah, I think for this period of time for me, I left a work environment that was very toxic and burning my sense of self and soul out, and have chosen this path for this moment in time that is piecing different parts of myself together. And so it looks very different at a lot of different days. But in addition to this death and the aging work, I recently started studying birth as well, which birth and death are just mirrors for each other of the same experience, emotionally in a lot of ways, but physically our bodies go through a laboring at the start and the end of life. So with also that, it's been a healing process for me, because it's being able to just like separate, my sense of control from these two things that are so, people talk about having like a birth plan or a death plan, and you can't. You can't. And so in addition to those things, I also, which feels like a very different, I guess, Brit, and something that a previous me would have been like, who are you to do this? I started doing some acting and some modeling work, which for me is a form of radical self-healing. And every person that I've talked to in the industry is like, that's ridiculous. This is the most toxic space I've ever been in. But because I'm able to have these different identities and selves and not have to throw myself into this one, I guess, status quo where everything is, about your physicality equaling your worth, I'm able to take what I need from it. And that's been so empowering for me, because it's reclaiming a boundary in a lot of ways. Like, I'm going to make this conscious decision I did a gig for a sound healing company a few weeks ago. I care about this female entrepreneur. I've learned her story. I'm going to represent her brand, and I'm going to choose to, and then I'm going to leave, and I'm going to go sit next to someone dying at hospice. Like, it's so easy to disconnect all of the bullshit that comes. Like, I don't think I could ever do work in that industry full time. But so that's a roundabout answer of
no, I love
day.
it. But it proves exactly what we're talking about. It's that ability to be able to go and operate in different spaces, and being open enough to operate in different spaces and having those boundaries.
That's what it comes down to.
Yeah.
Is openness.
And I think a lot of the times it gets shit on, at least in my experience. And it's a judgment of, oh, well, how could you possibly do? I can't do that. So how can you do that? And I'm like, whoa, okay. Like,
and that's a projection.
Yeah. I'm like,
right there.
All right. And I really appreciated you making that comment earlier about projections and the mirroring of each other, because that's definitely how I have chosen to navigate through the world. And at any moment, whether you're passing someone on the street who, I live in New York now, and, seeing some people drive by in their Maseratis and some of these, pretty interesting and gnarly vehicles, that could be me. I could also be the person on the street. And what does that look like? And how are you going to treat those people? And how are you going to act around those people? And my daughter last night, she was, I don't know, there's some.
Oh, I didn't know you had a daughter.
Mm-hmm, yeah, she's 6. And she had February vacation last week. And so this week she was like, we're back to school. And I could tell. I was like, you good, bro? Like, I don't want to go. I'm like, well, we gotta, no matter what, like, if you don't go to school, like, I'm going to jail. So we gotta find a compromise here. Like, what's wrong? What's the underlying cause? And my partner is very much like an abolitionist through and through. So this baby knows a lot about all things jail, which is hilarious.
That's great.
Side note.
I was not taught that as a 6-year-old.
Oh, man. Yeah. She's a hell of an individual. And so to circle back, the reason why I bring this up is because somebody at school, some other girl, is giving her a hard time often, I guess. And I've heard it like on and off, but I didn't realize like, It was that big of a thing. So she's telling me, well, this girl, she's mean to me. And so I was explaining to her, I was like, listen, like, I know it sucks, obviously. Like, there's no doubting that. But if we're being honest, that says way more about her than it does about you. And of course, to like a 6-year-old, she's like, but I don't understand. Like, but she's being mean to me. And I'm like, yeah, I understand. But like, you have no idea what's going on for her at home. I was like, does she have brothers? Does she have sisters, older, younger? Is she getting picked on? Or her parents, not treating her kindly? Like, what is that situation? And she was like, well, yeah, I know she has a big brother. And I was like, well, have you seen him at school? Yeah. Is he mean to her? Yeah. I'm like, maybe it's providing some context. Like if she's getting picked on, maybe that's why, she's being a meanie pants. She's like, huh, okay. It just like provided that context and then explaining. I was like, dude, there was a whole clique of mean girls that I went to school with. And, I could tell you some stories about that I'm not going to tell you at 6, but, I sure as hell would not choose to be in their shoes right now. So I think we're doing okay. And it was just interesting attempting to convey that perspective that you shared earlier to a little person.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
But then also, it's not even explaining it to a little person because I talked about this with one of the girls that I work with. I was like, because she's my stepdaughter, she came into my world 3 years ago. And so having her in my life has been such a game changer because one, it's upped my communication skills times 1,000,000. And two, I've literally shifted so much of my communication now, especially in business. If I speak to people the way that I speak to her, it works.
I love that. I love everything about that.
And I'm like, okay, like it just, just full cycle. I'm like, everyone just wants to be seen and heard and understood. And how do we hold that space? And I'm so impressed and grateful for you that you are on the other side of being able to have those boundaries. I have not learned that skill yet, but not letting it take up all that space and energy.
Well, I mean, it's like this, like there's nothing linear about this or that.
Right.
I mean, it's a practice, obviously, but in a lot of ways, it's just from what I'm hearing from you, it's like just no bullshit. It's simple, clear. Totally. We don't have enough of that.
we definitely don't.
And I think it goes to this identity thing, like especially in like more of a corporate work setting. Like sometimes I'd be in meetings and I'd be like, why, what are you saying? Like, can you please speak English?
Right.
Like
totally.
And it baffles me because so much when you like strip down it's like someone trying to hold a position of power or claim control in some ways. And yeah, just simplicity is always the answer.
And so is all of that to say, is that your motivation now for going back to get your master's?
Simplicity.
Wanting to buck the system, change the system from the inside?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's definitely that fire within me. I wouldn't say like I'm here to change the world because that feels like too big of a burden that I don't need to place on myself. But I think like a lot of my driving motivation is how can I feel more alive in my life and give that feeling to other people. And
totally.
For me, having a really intimate relationship with death gives me a greater depth and appreciation for life.
I love that so much. That's such an awesome
and
way
I don't
to put
mean it in like it's like just so there's nothing like spiritual or overcomplicated about it. It's just having some sort of connection with the fact that this is all going to end and that everyone I love is going to be gone. Just allows a sense of deeper presence. Totally. But it's easy to forget, just like any truth.
Of course. But I just really love how you just phrased it about that feeling of being alive. And I think that's the biggest part, at least in my experience of working in any corporate environments. That's the fire that gets put out pretty instantaneously in those environments. And it's not just in corporate environments. It's also in, in startups, but it's not, I guess my comment was more, it's not just in business. It's also in events and parties and gatherings and get-togethers. And it's all this like the fake part of it. And the frustrating part of it is when you go and you want to connect with people and they say, well, here's, hit me up on whatever. Here's my business card. And you're like,
Yeah. I mean, it's the same thing when you meet someone and they're like, what do you do? Versus like, I hate that. I know I hate that so much.
Yes. That's like, I've never been able to answer that question ever.
Same.
And that's honestly the biggest common denominator between all of the people who listen to this podcast for the most part and come to the events is the inability to answer, what do you do? And so at the last event that we had down in Nashville, we were talking through it and we all agreed, the handful of us who were there, we all agreed that instead of asking, what do you do? We're going to be asking the question, what are you working on right now that you're excited about?
I love that.
And just like that simple switch. That. And then for me too, I think I'm just going to start answering the question, what do you do, with that response? I'm working on whatever it is. But it's also interesting to go back to what we had talked about earlier in terms of when you answer the question, if someone were to ask me, well, what are you working on? Well, I'm working on this podcast. And then that's it. Like that apparently is the sentence.
You're a podcaster. Right. You're a podcaster.
And I'm like, nope. That's not it. So it's definitely very interesting for sure.
I like the question, how are you spending your time?
Oh, I like that one.
As well as like, what are some big questions that you're chewing on right now?
Yes. Oof. I got to add those to the roster. Those are good. Oh, man. Well, before we wrap up, I do ask every amazing human that comes on this podcast, what is the worst piece of advice that you've ever gotten? And what is the best piece of advice that you've ever received?
When I saw your email of this, I had a very hard time thinking about it because one, I've gotten a lot of really bad advice, and two, I've gotten a lot of really good advice. So yeah, I'll just preface that by saying that. And again, when you think about like projecting in context, like it's all about where I was in receiving each of those pieces of wisdom. But I'd say what I want to speak to is a piece of negative advice I got back in the fall, and the most, I guess, like poignant effects that people can have on you, or at least on me, are when they say so much without saying anything at all. And I was working in a startup-y innovation design firm environment, and the kind of like overall underlying behavior was the client over everything. Always, it's about how can we serve the client better, which like even that language is like, what the fuck? And what that instills in the people who are delivering a service is lose yourself in service of this external thing. And I, 2 different occasions, were given the feedback that I needed to lessen myself, hold back, small myself, not be too much. And that's a piece of feedback I get in every environment. I'm sure you relate very deeply.
I've never heard that before.
You've never heard it? Oh my God, that's so crazy. Well, I'm alone in this feeling, I guess.
I've heard it. Every failed relationship that I've had, every failed startup that I've worked for, every client that I've had, that ends up, of course, being the catalyst for the ending of said relationship.
Yeah. I have a mentor of mine who says, you just have to start embracing your muchness, because like, I'm a lot. And like, a lot for what?
You got to find more people.
Yeah. 2 people that are so inspiring to me are Glennon Doyle and Jenny Slate. Have you read any of their? Yeah. Okay, great. they have given me a lot of acceptance of my allotments.
I'm just waiting for Glennon to be on. So if you want to put in a good word.
It's my favorite podcast. I call them very often and I'm like, I just want you guys to know that this podcast makes me feel really excited about being alive. It's so good. Anyway, so the worst piece of advice is essentially that you're too much and that you need to hold back a part of yourself in order to belong. And I've gotten that in so many different ways, both explicitly and not explicitly.
Leave us on a good note. Lay it on us.
Yes. Okay. And then leaving on a good note, which is very much the opposite from that. It's one of my dad's cornerstone phrases. I don't even remember when first instilled this into my sisters and I, but it's called the fuck you attitude.
Woo!
Have a fuck you attitude.
There we go.
And it means it's not about being cocky or I'm better than you. It's about I belong here. I deserve to be here. I don't give a fuck about what all you people think because what I am and what I have and what I do and all of the things about me are enough. And yeah, fuck you attitude. And anytime that I'm feeling like I don't have it, he'll be like, where's the fuck you attitude? And I'm like, oh, right. Okay. Yeah, I'm
yes.
I deserve to be here.
Our dads would get along.
I deserve to take up space. Yeah. I'm sure.
Is your dad like an old Jewish man too?
He's not an old Jewish man.
I didn't know if it was your mom or your dad.
No, they're both
okay.
Jewish, but I don't think he would ever identify with that phrase. He's just like a guy who genuinely believes life can be easy. And it's not a front. It's like, yeah, I want that thing. I'm going to get that thing. Why not? You want to try that? Go for it. Why not? Walk in, and it's also, in addition to the fuck you attitude, it's if you don't ask, you don't get. That is such a beautiful piece of wisdom that I feel like I use every day.
Oh man, that was so good. I love that so much. I had a lot of things to take away from this. So thank you so much for spending your time with me and sharing all that you know with all these awesome folks who listen in. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I so believe in this message and everything that you are, all of the hyphens that you are, and looking forward to getting to spend some time with you in person, hopefully when our paths cross.
Thank you for listening to The Cost of the Status Quo and learning the wisdom, stories, and ideas that will have you feeling inspired and ready to take on the world. If you've enjoyed this, please remember to share, rate, and review. It means the world to me and the team putting it all together. If you're looking for more information, you can find us at costofthestatusquo.com or on Instagram at costofthestatusquo. If you've got any questions or curiosity about me, you can find me at lindseylerner.com. That's LindseyLerner.com or on Instagram at Lindsey Lerner. Thanks again for listening. Hope you have an awesome day.